Hello and welcome. We've got Gregory Middleton. He's a well-known cinematographer in Canada, award-winning for things like Game of Thrones. Who knew? So welcome.
Hi, Lee. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. So I remember meeting you, well, through way back when Kissed, the Canadian film Kissed came out.
Yeah,
Um, and I think, was that your first feature that you?
yeah, it was. That was back in 1997,
Okay.
and it was the first feature film that I shot. The director is Lynn Stopkowicz, who was someone I met. He's a Montrealer, actually. I'm from Montreal originally.
Oh.
We met actually at UBC in Vancouver. We were both going to school. She was doing her master's, and I was doing my undergrad. And we worked on some other projects together. And then when she was, getting ready for her first small movie feature, she asked me to shoot it after we've been knowing each other for a little while. And so that was the first one. We shot it over the summer, basically, of '94. It took about 2.5 years to sort of finish and do a lot of small reshoots and shape. Like a lot of small movies have a long gestation period to be finalized. And it came out in '97, and that's when we met, when it was having its little rounds. We were very fortunate that it did well and found an audience back then.
And what was your, like, since it was your first feature, what was your approach to it from, just starting out? Like, what was your sort of artistic view of the aesthetics?
Well, it's interesting, actually. Yeah, it's funny. I actually just did a podcast with Lynn and Molly and myself, and discussing, and Jessica Fraser talking about the making of the film. It just brought back a lot of stories, actually, for a podcast called The Projection Booth, if anyone wants to look that up.
Okay.
It was like an hour-long conversation. But it was, it's interesting, actually, because for those of you who don't know anything about the film, it's based on a short story by Barbara Gowdy, who's a Canadian writer, and she based her story on a interview she read in a magazine called The Unrepentant Necrophile, about a young woman that worked at a funeral parlor that was falling in love with young men, dead bodies, and eventually absconded with one of them and took off and was found in a motel, a couple hours out of town. She couldn't bear to part with him. So so Barbara read this interview and was inspired to write. She's kind of she would describe herself, I think, as a leap of imagination writer. She's not writing of specifics of specific knowledge, but sort of using her imagination to explore something based on an idea she has or something she's curious about. And so she wrote this short story called "We So Seldom Look on Love," which was about essentially a young woman who's necrophile and sort of about her obsession. And it was a story about obsession and love and how we project onto things. And so the film was really about those elements of a person's
inner psyche, maybe, or
inner psyche, about like how she related to this thing. It was not trying to be like a horror or a film which is done to gross you out. I think that was the big challenge that both Lynn and I faced in terms of how to realize the story, was to, obviously it's a story about stuff that most people would consider incredibly grotesque and kind of hard to relate to, but you had to be able to figure out a way to relate to her as a character, and that in the story is written from a lot of inside her head about how she sort of perceives death and what she sees in people and what she projects onto them.
And like visually, did you have a certain approach, like for your?
Yeah. So what we did, so the fall through that was how to come up with a way to sort of, visually express those kind of ideas, and some of them were inspired directly by lines from the book, lines from the story, and she talks about like bodies shining like stars, or what she would see in them, and what she was projecting onto them, or what the energy she was feeling from that. So we tried to represent that visually and make those experiences like photographically quite beautiful for her to kind of express like her point of view of what she was seeing and what she was, and also to not dwell on the kind of gory details of it, which would be maybe a bit too squeamish for most people, but also would detract from emotionally her experience and what her experience is. Her experience is not a gross experience. It's like a lovely experience. And when she explores in the story this romance with a young man named Matt, who becomes obsessed with death and stuff, and he can't relate to her in the way that she likes to relate to the people that are dead, and it creates this logjam in their relationship and obviously the conflict for the story. But it was a way to try and film things in the way that she would emotionally be, her emotional point of view, essentially, and do it that way photographically, which means for a lot of part using light was a big factor, and as was inspired by the story, using bright white light and having that be present and sort of make itself aware in these various scenes, either with the sort of light above in the autopsy room, or there's a scene in the car wash, which we had a fake sun streaming in the windows. It got quite bright at sort of pivotal times, and I used little things like I used a little diffusion filter where I slid into the shot to sort of help create a bit of a glow at certain times, and just tried to hopefully do it subtly enough that you wouldn't be thinking it was very theatrical,
right?
But also prominent enough that it would have a feeling and sort of help us appreciate the beauty of these experiences from her perspective.
And I can't help but thinking, because it was all that time ago, how technology must have changed, and right, and so I just
Well, there were no Skype interviews in 1997 because email was like a brand new thing at that point. We shot that film in 16 millimeter, and it was common at that time to even use Super 16, which is like a wider format, kind of like the shape of my little window down there, like a 16 by 9, which is more the common aspect ratio for now HD, but also what most cinemas made, either that or even very widescreen. And 16 millimeters is naturally quite square. We couldn't do Super 16 because we had to use the camera from the university, which was only a regular 16 camera. So we were confined to making a 4:3 shape film, but we just embraced that as part of the restriction and composed for that as best we could. And I tried to photograph it just from a technical standpoint, for any young cinematographers watching that remember the film days, hoping that the film would be blown up to 35 eventually if it would ever get a release, or at least be seen on a big screen. Right. So we tried carefully to photographically, be as detailed as possible, and I use a lot of slower film stocks to create a much finer grain image, not to have a gritty, grainy image, but as much of a fine grain, like highly saturated images for the images we wanted to be beautiful and to have less detail on the skin and the like. I tried to expose and also use film that would help that become reality if we ever got blown up to bigger form, which we did eventually. So it paid off. It made for some challenging lighting with very slow. I mean, I shot a lot of the film with 100 ASA film and some with 50 ASA film, and that's quite slow if anyone remembers what that is like compared to the cameras now the digital cameras are normally at 800, and you can always shoot them faster than that. That's a much larger amount of light on a tiny film to be able to use for small scenes.
Right. Okay, and so you have a large, long repertoire of films that you've shot, and I know that you worked with Jeremy Podeswa, right?
Yes.
Maybe you can talk a bit about those two films.
Yeah, it's interesting because after Kiss was the first film I shot, and I when I was in university, I shot some other students' films, and I started to think that maybe a career as a cinematographer is where I would sort of fit in some ways, because I was definitely interested in the filmmaking process, and I really got hooked on being around the camera and becoming being part of the collaboration. I was not a natural photographer as a kid. I wasn't taking tons of still photos. I kind of came to cinematography out of a love of movie making and storytelling.
Okay.
But I had some aptitude for it, and I liked it. So after Kiss came out, I finally had a film I could show a complete narrative feature, which is the classic catch-22 in this business for anyone starting out even today is you get hired for the job you just done. So when you haven't done something, no one will hire you for something new. And I'd now shot one, small art house movie. I'd worked on many shorts and been a camera operator in some other films before then, but that was my first, feature credit. And then Jeremy Podeswa saw the film. He was a Toronto filmmaker at the time. And he liked the film a lot. He met Lynn at a film festival, and he was looking for someone to shoot his second feature. So he contacted me after meeting Lynn, and he got along with Lynn a lot, and he liked my work in the film. And more importantly for him, he got along well with Lynn, and realized, okay, if Greg collaborates well with Lynn, who seems a bit similar to me, then maybe he's the right sort of person for me. So he contacted me, sent me his script. His script was a lovely exploration called The Five Senses of sense and the relationship between senses and how we relate to each other and how we can use them to mask things or to explore things. And it was a lovely sort of 5-part melange story of all interacting these 5 stories together, all centered around different sense. And the script was lovely, and I hadn't shot a film in Toronto yet, so it was a great opportunity to shoot another film and use what lessons I learned from kissed and the stuff afterwards. So that's how we met, and we shot the film in the fall of '98, and it came out in 1999 and did well, and then got won some awards, got into Cannes as well, which kissed as well, so that helped another notch on the resume, which helped a lot. So it was it was a good experience, and he's a fantastic filmmaker, and we're still good friends. We work together now on Game of Thrones, actually. So
Okay, cool. Well, maybe this is a good segue to talk about Game of Thrones and how that happened.
yeah, well, that's people always ask like, how did you get on that fantastic show? And it's like, well, 20 years of backbreaking labor and a lot of good fortune. And the thing you learn in this business is, in the same way when I'm looking for people to hire for a crew, if I'm looking for people that I don't know, it's a fairly one of the things that makes it difficult to get new opportunities is it's harder for someone to take a risk on hiring someone that they have no experience with directly. And if they don't have experience directly with that person, then they at least want to have a good reference from someone that they know well, not just from like a good review of somebody they've never met before, but someone that they know can vouch for their qualities if they're the right kind of person for the job, not just artistically, but also the right temperament and all the things you look for in a collaborator. Because they're kind of filmmaking is quite a it's quite a crucible when you're making a film. You spend a lot of time with these people, either film or television. You're with them 15 hours a day or longer for a very intense period for several weeks. You will see everybody get to their breaking point and come back, and you will. So you tend to pick people that you think you can rely on well. That'll be perform well, but also be the right mix in the team. It's like casting anything. So by that consequence, that extends into all types of jobs, including something like Game of Thrones, where they do they try and pick directors that they think will work well on the show if they're new. And Jeremy had done a lot of work for HBO in the past. In the previous 10, 12 years, he worked on 6 Feet Under, partly on the strength of The Five Senses, which they liked very much. And Alan Ball and the other producers on that show were actively trying to bring in independent filmmakers onto 6 Feet Under to bring more of a artistic quality to the storytelling. It would not just sort of be what HBO was still developing its sort of brand as being like higher quality drama storytelling than the network shows. And this is a long time ago, so that was an integral part to that, and that extended into the kind of work they did afterwards. So season 5 came along, and Jeremy's name had come up for an episode in season 4, ended up not being able to work out. Well, I know my name had kind of circulated through the sort of rounds at that point once. And in the intervening time, I worked on a show called The Killing for AMC and Netflix, and worked with a lot of other, HBO directors, a lot of producers that worked on those shows. And so this was my resume and my name had kind of circulated through. I worked on a couple of bigger productions like Passchendaele, which was the Paul Gross World War I movie. So my resume sort of had the right mix of things, of enough skill level wise and types of shows that would make sense. And then the other thing you need a personal reference. You need someone who says, yes, Greg would be good on your show. And that came from, I'd met one of the producers once before, and I interviewed for a pilot, which she actually didn't remember in the end, Bernadette Caulfield, who's one of the executive producers. But the other thing was to work with Jeremy and then have them ask Jeremy, he said, well, I would like to bring someone like Greg. My name had kind of come around once already. I know 2 other cinematographers on the show, Jonathan Freeman, one of them, who also was from Toronto originally, who vouched for me and said, yes, you'd like Greg a lot. He does beautiful work. He's a lot like me. And because the show is a very, not just a large show, but a challenging show with the way it's produced. It's very unusual for a television production because it's kind of like making 5 2-hour movies all at the same time. So the departments are all prepping, year 2 episodes and 4 other sets of 2 episodes. And they're all cross-boarded, so you're all working at the same time through various sets. So you have to end up collaborating and working together. You have to be able to, as they would say in the sandbox, play well with others. And you have to be able to do all that and be a good team player. As well as try and produce, the quality of the show that is, which is incredible. So it was quite a daunting task, one I was excited about, but also quite frightened about. So it came about that way, hiring a director first. They do like to hire directors and DPs that know each other, or if they don't, they'll try and pair people together that have been on the show, so not everything will be new. In our case, we were both new on the show, but we worked together a lot. I'd done another movie with Jeremy, and it's a television project, so we knew each other well. And I knew other people on the show, and so we were, I'm sure for them it was a bit of a dice roll. They were hoping it would go well, and after a few weeks, they're like, okay, they're going to be all right. It's going to be all right. On to the next problem, because it's an incredibly ambitious production for what they pull off in a year.
It's like a feature film for every show.
Yeah, and they do, and normally one feature film would have this full 6 months and the post period to make the 1 2 hours, and they're doing that, 5 of them all together. It's an incredibly daunting task and amazingly complex thing to be involved with, and a real blessing. So, but that's basically how it came about. And I was hoping we would do well enough to get asked back, and we did, and they liked us very much. So we came back into 2 episodes of season 6, the first 2, and we just finished 2 episodes of season 7, which is only 7 episodes, and we got to do the first and last of that season. So very excited about that. It was a big responsibility. The story is kind of coming to a head now, and there's only going to be 6 episodes in the final season. So we're definitely getting towards the end game of the story.
No spoilers, right?
Absolutely not. I'm chipping my head the HBO put in there, so if I even say something, I'm just going to turn it off, and then just you see me slump over because I've mentioned something.
Totally. Okay. Well, yeah, awesome experience, and it shows you how you can start off with a small feature, film like Kissed, and then all the way through to something as cinematically epic as Game of Thrones.
Yeah, because in the end, it's all the thing that's fascinating about filmmaking as a team sort of experience. I mean, Kiss was a really like a seminal experience because we all felt very strongly about the story we're trying to tell. It was the kind of story which could only really work at that type of film, a small film. I mean, it would never have been financed at a bigger level. It was just too risque a subject. It was too big of a gamble to make work. And so there's a lot of passion involved in trying to tell that story. And even when I get onto something, and it's the same with Paul Gross making Passchendaele. That was a project that he spent 10 years trying to put together.
Wow.
And it was a big uphill battle to assemble a budget large enough to pull off, World War I battle at the end of a movie. And that's not something that Canadian films mostly do because it's the budget is just too high. I mean, they raised about $20 million in the end. And that's the kind of budget we end up having on Game of Thrones for 2 hours. It's about $10 million an hour ish. And some is a bit now they're getting a bit more than that. But the commonality of all those projects, including Game of Thrones, is passion. And when and that attracts good people, but it also you realize that that's a really important factor. It's not everybody's in it for just to tell a good story or to do things they want to see. It's not. I mean, it's too big a world that everyone would feel that way. But it's not uncommon in the stuff that I've managed to experience, where I've been very fortunate to work with people that are passionate about what they want to do and the like, and the people on Thrones are like that. When I had my interview for the project, when they booked us, Bernadette Caulfield, we had a Skype call kind of like this, where she said, "I just want to talk to you briefly about the show." And I was a bit terrified. I thought I had the job already because they had already booked us. But what she wanted to do is to just have sort of a welcome conversation on Skype. And one of the most important things was the 2 showrunners, David and Dan, the main executive producer writers, is like when they invite someone new on the show, it's like you're really bringing somebody into that family. They've been running for, at that point, this was season 5, they had 4 years of series. They had people that had worked out, and some people that didn't, and the people that they don't ask back, and they're very careful about who they want to invite in because it's a big thing. It's in the same way that Lynn asked me to do Kissed. It was like we knew each other. It seemed like the right time. It seemed like I had the right amount of experience and the right, gumption to want to prove myself, and all the things we had as like young filmmakers. And it's not much different than the conversation that Bernie had with me, which was, David and Dan are like, we just want to make sure we're asking someone. It's like we're asking someone to the dance. We want to really, really, really make sure they want to come to the dance. They don't want people that want to be there because it's the biggest show. On TV at the moment, and it's their ego. They want people that are passionate about what the show is about, and they want to be part of telling that story. And they want to, they can play well with others and not be, an egomaniac, and because none of that stuff would be helpful. And they're like that themselves. And that was a big factor.
Were you a big fan of the show then? Like
I was a big fan before, and I literally jumped up and down when I got the phone call because I was just finishing the 4th season of The Killing, which was a show I really enjoyed, and my first time working on a series and doing entire seasons, and I didn't realize that could become still what I liked about independent filmmaking, because it was, I had a fantastic boss in Vina Sood, who was the writer, executive producer, and she was very encouraging, and I got to treat the whole season kind of like a whole movie and, plot out visual structure of the show, and she was very, encouraging for me experimenting and doing stuff, and it was a great experience. And when that was ending, I was, what am I going to do after this? I'm kind of spoiled now. I've been very fortunate. And then this phone call came, and I jumped up and down because I've been watching the show since it started. and got totally sucked in, especially in the second season. And I know two of the other DPs, especially one of them, Jonathan Freeman, who I'd known from Toronto, who was a genius and had been on a lot of other great work in HBO in the last few years, including Boardwalk Empire. And I would always email him when I watched an episode that I thought was particularly spectacular and stuff, and we'd get in touch. So the chance to get to work on it, being a big fan, was already daunting and terrifying, but also immensely exciting. So.
Awesome. And Passchendaele is something that you said kind of helped bridge those two worlds a little bit, or because they're so large scale.
Well, it just, I mean, if you look at, like the Battle of the Bastards episode, which I didn't get to shoot, but that's kind of that size of battle. It's like about a month-long shoot. It's that sort of size, complex sequence. It's going to last 25 minutes. And just planning those things from a filmmaking standpoint is very helpful if you've done that, if you ever get near that type of thing again. And so from an experience level, they would, it's helpful. It's less frightening if you've done it once. And I think that was a big factor. And they watched that, and Bernie's seen that, and she thought they did a very nice job on that. And it was that factor. Like, okay, well, that means if we have to throw Greg into a sequence like that, it's not like a total unknown. I'd done a film in Belize with stuff on boats, and we had stuff on boats in our first episode in this canal, and that's like a lot of logistical planning of like how you do it,
right.
And the grips on the show are great, but there's a lot of discussion of like what type of boats to use. Will I put a crane on the boat? What type of head? How we're going to work? What kind of shots do we want to the water? We're going to be towing the boat. It does a lot of complex logistical things like that, just from a practicality standpoint of how to do it once you figure out what you want to look like,
right?
Which is a whole other thing. And to have some experience with those things on a show this big helps. I had just enough experience to be valuable, to be useful,
right.
And not to be too daunted by it. So it was, the timing was all kind of perfect.
So with that kind of whole arc of things, what would you say to a young cinematographer starting out? Like if you could say something to your younger self, or just something inspiring, I don't know.
Well, I think, I would circle back to what I just said now about the passion, because
right.
You'll be, either way, you'll be working with other people, and you want to be a good collaborator. There's a funny, I don't know if anyone's ever read, was a fan of Chris Hadfield, the Canadian astronaut. He wrote a funny book on his astronaut experiences, and he's a great expression about, being, he's an elite level as a pilot and everything else to get picked for a space program. But he's a great expression for, it's kind of like, which is I think very valuable for being a member of a team on a film production, which is it's like trying to be a zero. So and what that means is if you categorize people as zeros, -1, and +1, okay. Basically what you want is like, who wants to be around? Who do you want on your team? Well, a +1 is somebody that does everything you've asked of them, great, and just adds a little extra in whatever way it could be, personality, skill, whatever. And so you're always a bit more prepared than you need to be. And that way, when you have a chance, you can actually help more than they would ever expect of you. Okay. And now, a -1 is like you do everything, but maybe you got one trait or something which kind of makes you bad. Like perhaps, he used an example of a pilot who was brilliant, but he was incredibly arrogant. And so he was a bit troublesome as far as personality-wise. And so he ended up being a bit of that. And he said, in the end, if you strive to be a +1, you hope to be a 0. But the idea is, trying to be a great collaborator, because it's a team thing, making a film of any kind, and that's a big factor. So if you have passion for storytelling, and you want to tell a story, and you want to be involved in helping people tell stories and have passion for it, that's like the first thing. And that sort of not trumps, but it sort of fuels everything else. Technology will change, cameras are changing, our whole delivery system of films is changing. The way people are relating is changing. We're in for some really huge changes in the next 15, 20 years when we get into augmented reality and virtual reality, and the way that will change things from a proscenium storytelling mode to something else. And there's a lot of experiments that are happening now about how that will be. And so cinema itself is going to probably change radically, or what could be construed as cinema might change radically in the next 10, 15 years. And that's kind of fascinating. But the commonality will still be the desire to tell a story, desire to use the tools, photography, design, stuff to help reinforce them and make them interesting. So if you have passion for that, that's the one thing. Technology will keep shifting. You keep learning the technology as it changes. But the thing you can't, sort of pick up is like a desire to be part of it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for chatting with us.
My pleasure. Nice to see
And
you. Thanks a
and
lot.
and people can watch Passchendaele on Canada Screens. So if they
Yeah,
want to check out,
is it high def on Canada screens? As you know, have you seen the qual? I haven't watched the qual. I'll check it out.
ooh, I will have to get back to you on that. I don't know
Well,
the
I hope so,
actual
yeah.
technical specs on that, but good
Well, it'd be
question.
nice because it's people do watch a lot of stuff on on mobile devices now, on iPads and or the laptops and the like. But the screens are getting better all the time, and the quality of video is getting better all the time. And now a home screen can have what you couldn't get in terms of cinema quality 10 years ago. You can get now, and that allows us as visual storytellers to use those other tools we'd normally reserve only for what will be a theatrical experience into something that's smaller. So that alone is quite exciting.
All right, thank you very much, and we'll have to in the notes. I'll have to let people know about the HD thing.
Okay, great.
All right, cheers.
All right, thank you very much.